The only thing more important than having the power to start a train is having the ability to stop a train. An air brake system is automatic if the brakes will apply automatically if the train breaks in two. The system demonstrated here by Sean Bautista, owner of the Hillcrest Shops, is flexible and effective. For this seminar, it will also be helpful to be familiar with a core concept behind the brake system. In a double-acting pneumatic cylinder, if the air pressure is equal on both sides, the piston will move toward the side with the rod, releasing the brakes. This is because the rod itself takes up some space, reducing the area of the piston exposed to the pressure. A drop in brake line pressure applies the brakes. After the seminar, we include an informal discussion about the differential wheels that turn independently of one another on the axles. We also include the procedure of getting the car back on the trucks, just for fun.
Let me explain to you guys kind of a little bit about the automatic brake system, some of the basics to it. Probably the most important feature in any automatic brake system to be truly automatic, the car hoses have to be able to disconnect from each other. So if you're using shop quick connects, you don't have an automatic brake system even if you have automatic brakes on your car, unless you're planning on ripping your hoses apart, which most of the time if you have a derailment or something else happens, they'll drag for a while before they bust and rip apart. So the first thing we figured we had to develop was a glad hand. And this kind of goes in with any kind of standardization. I'll let you pass that around that way. You guys pass that around that way. Any kind of standardization that you have on a railroad or between railroads, if you want to take your equipment to other people's places, that is one of those things not mentioned about, but that's one of those things that needs standardization. And that's why if I have them in my side shop when we cleaned out for this convention. I used to have them right here, but I had an 1890s Westinghouse F-style glad hand and a 1980s Westinghouse or a Wabco glad hand, and the two interconnect. Because of all the cars built that are all over North America and Central America, they can't, if they make anything that doesn't connect with that, they've just outdated all the stuff. So they're forced into retro technology. The glad hands of today are very much the glad hands of 120 years ago. So in our railroads, as we standardize the wheels and the coupler heights and everything else and dimensions on curves, this is another part that's going to need either standardization or isolated. You'll see that today. Ken Kagi just came in with his cars. He has straight air system and he uses shop quick connects. Our trains can couple, our trains can go through the same railroads and all that stuff, but our brakes don't. And so there's another area. Now, let me show you guys, hand me the two glad hands. These would be really illegal, grossly illegal by OSHA standards today. They never allow these to be made because they don't have a locking feature. That's all you do to connect the glad hands. They'll hold these, we've only tested these to 120 PSI, no leaks, and 10 inches of vacuum. Hold it, Carl, hold that real tight 2 minutes so I don't pull it out. Do my demonstrator. For the thing to work, and we're going to pretend we're the car, so this is sitting 90 degrees to the cars in a couple. It has to be able to hold 120 PSI and it has to be able to pull apart. So now your brakes all locked up. If it can't do that, you really don't have an emergency function of your brake system. So that little goodie there was about $10,000 worth of development to figure out how it works. And it's funny, I've had train guys try to tell me, oh, it's how these things actually function right, and none of them have been right so far. It took us a long time to break the code on how they really, really work. And I had a customer here who's a movie guy. And he looked at that and goes, oh, it works like this. And he was right. It was funny. He figured it out pretty quick.
Chris Allen has worked on trains both small and large. He's also built spaceships for B movies. Most importantly, he has created a charming entry-level steam engine with a little help from his friends.
A little more background. I kind of started out as a volunteer at the Rio Vista Museum near Rio Vista up in the Bay Area. I was a volunteer for almost 10 years. I met people like Jerry Hanford, who kind of took me under their wing and taught me what they could about steam. We were running a Western Pacific 10-wheeler, and I was going through puberty at the same time, so it was difficult. But he taught me about all that stuff. So when the time came, I kind of floated around from tourist railroad to tourist railroad. Sometimes Jerry would be there, and there came a point in my life when making $5.50 an hour just wasn't cutting it anymore. So I decided to go to college, but I still liked working on the train, so I took a machine shop class at Diablo Valley College in Pleasant Hill, which was convenient because the teacher there was also one of the steam guys at Rio Vista, so I made a lot of extra credit locomotive parts. But while I was working my way through college, I had a bunch of really awful jobs, and eventually it occurred to me that there was this cool little railroad up in Berkeley, up in the hills, the Redwood Valley Railway. I'd only been there a couple of times, so I talked to Gerald, and he said, you know, why don't you go up there and see if Eric needs a summer engineer? And it just so happened he did. So I pulled a couple summers up there. Back in the days when we'd get like 300 people a day would come in, which was, you know, really busy. I was all by myself. I emptied the trash. I picked the dead animals off the railroad. I did all that stuff by myself. And Eric had his track consulting firm at the time, so he'd just kind of pop in once a week or so, and I'd give him a roll of $20 bills. And that would be it. But, you know, every so often I'd get to talking with him, and you know, we'd talk about those people who would come in and they were all gooned up about the railroad. They say, you know, how can I get started in this? You know, I want to do this for sure. And, you know, Eric would all but, you know, beat them over the head because, you know, he knew that he'd get 30 of these people a month coming in, and, you know, they couldn't, you know, they didn't know what was involved. They didn't know how much work was involved in building a 10-wheeler or a mogul, so. In the back of Eric's mind, he always had this little 040, just to, you know, he wanted the hobby to kind of grow, not, you know, not to the point of like the 7.5-inch gauge hobby, but he wanted the hobby to grow. So, you know, we talked about that, and I kind of got interested in that because, you know, I was kind of digging the machinist thing, and, you know, so time passed. You know, I did a side elevation. I sent it to Eric. And he set it on his drafting table, and he was busy doing things like designing 262s for Ken Kagi and all this, building a roundhouse. And you know, before you know it, Eric passed away. So I kind of said, well, no one's ever told me I can't design a steam locomotive. So I went and we bought a computer and we bought a CAD program, and I said, you know, I told myself if I can draw the cylinder on CAD, I can probably do just about anything else, and that's kind of where it began. And thanks to a lot of people, including Gerald and Sean, almost 5 years later, to the almost to the week, we had it running at Redwood Valley for the 50th anniversary. So.
Many of you have had the chance to see Jack Sessums' 15-inch gauge railroad in our Magic of the Grand Scales DVD. In that program, we only touched briefly on Jack's special effects work. He made a career of building and destroying good-looking models to feed the Hollywood Dream Factory. Since this presentation, Jack lost his battle with cancer, and the railroad hobby lost one of its star players. His railroad still runs under the care of Jack's wife Beverly and their adult sons. We consider it an honor to share some of Jack's stories with you.
Anyway, for the last 25 or so years, not only being in the hobby of building locomotives, which was my true love, somehow I magically got into destroying them also. And as you know, it's really hard to destroy one of these locomotives if you build it the way they're built to last for a long time. So we have to build our locomotives depending on what the requirements are to come apart. Boiler explosions, which are really not boilers and they're really not exploding, but they, you know, visually look that way. So what we do is we de-engineer everything down, and we make things that that people expect to see happen. And we kind of address all of our visual ideas to the people in Iowa. It's kind of a joke that we say that if we can fool the guys in Iowa, we can, you know, fool everybody. Well, and in this business, you also try to fool your peers, which is really hard to do because there's a lot of good effects people out there, and there's a lot of good stuff being put on film. And unfortunately, a lot of it's being done digitally now, and I think everybody in here knows what that means. It's all done with little X's and O's, and it's easily manipulated. But what we do is we do what are called live action in-camera effects. So what you see is what you get. When you see a train smash in the back of another one and it just destroys it, that's exactly what's happening. We're not enhancing that anyway with any digital dust or any digital. We do take wires out.